All right. Can I give it over to Matt?
Yep, I'm happy to take it over. So now we're going to talk about the different kind of cloud service model types that are available. So if we move on to the next slide, there are kind of three primary service concepts or service model types that get talked about in the AZ-900. They get abbreviated to IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. These different concepts have slightly different characteristics, so we'll go through each one individually, and we'll start off with infrastructure as a service and move through from there. So moving into infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, it's a cloud service model that provides the basic kind of computing resources. So this is your virtual machines and your storage accounts and kind of the core networking that is available within a cloud platform. There's no additional configuration or management from Azure or the cloud service provider that you're using. Azure is just responsible for maintaining the hardware, connectivity to the machine, so making sure it can get out into the internet, and as Gregor alluded to earlier, to ensure that people can't get to the machine itself, so making sure that the building is secure. Everything else within an IaaS service, you are responsible for yourself. So this is essentially just renting hardware from Microsoft, and you get to deploy what operating system you'd like on it and configure it how you like. This kind of provisioning, as Simon mentioned in his manageability section, can either be done through the Azure portal, and it could also be done via scripting, so as PowerShell or Bicep or one of the other kind of infrastructure as code style languages. Once deployed, you're then able to configure the applications however you see fit. So Microsoft aren't going to, within reason, control what you do. They're not going to allow you to spin up a spam bot network to spam a whole load of emails, but they will let you do things within good reason. So the benefits there are, you have the flexibility to do what you want, you have the maximum control over them, and you can kind of provision the resources how you see fit. When comparing on-premise hardware to cloud, IaaS hosted services, kind of the advantages that Lisa and Simon kind of mentioned previously. So they're scalable, they're flexible, they're highly available. You can scale these resources up and down as you see fit, and there is no capital expenditure. You are just paying for what you use. There is no other kind of cost over and above that kind of pay-as-you-go model for these kind of services. And you are, so when comparing to on-premises hardware, you're not having to have spare hardware sat there waiting to cope for a spike in demand.
What's your favorite IaaS service?
My favorite IaaS service? Oh, crikey. So there are a number, kind of the very basic one would be a virtual machine. So this is where, it's, as the name suggests, it's a virtual machine. Kind of the on-premise version would be Hyper-V or a VMware VM. It's the very kind of, I think, bread and butter of where kind of cloud computing started. So I would probably go towards that. Possibly, kind of if you want to put a few more bells and whistles on it, then like a scale set. So it's not just a VM, but it's a scalable VM. So there's a bit more of a platform of a service kind of component to it, in that Microsoft help you scale that in and out. But
Sandeep's got a question for you. Is it a similar structure as an on-prem, i.e. host servers and virtual machines, or is it different?
So it's very similar in that you have control over the virtual machines. You don't see the host hardware. That's the little bit of the responsibility that Azure have, in that they look after the hardware. So you don't really see the host server itself. You can find out the host ID, but apart from that, nothing else. The core concept of infrastructure as a service is basically that. It's giving you your own data center in the cloud where you configure it how you want with load balancers and user-defined routes and networking as you see fit. So yeah, kind of it's a little different in that you don't really have the host aspect, but you still have the concept of the virtual machines. So moving on to the scenarios, this kind of comes back to what Sandeep was saying, kind of with your on-prem. So I don't know if Lisa or Gregor's driving there, but we can go to one more slide on. Yeah, so
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. So for infrastructure as a service, there's a couple of scenarios where you would want to be using these specific kind of resources. One is a term or sort of process called lift and shift, which is where you would take an on-prem data center and literally just move your VMs out of that data center and put them into the cloud, into a public cloud infrastructure. Sort of sometimes this is a good way of sort of dipping your toe into into public cloud infrastructure. It gives you a familiar basis because you're still running the VMs that you were running on-prem, but in a new environment. So sort of there are slight differences. So you get to learn those differences and how the cloud infrastructure behaves differently to a private data center. There is a similar process, which is something I prefer more than the lift and shift, which is something called a move and improve. This is where you take a little bit more time to kind of investigate the workloads that you're running within your private data center and look to migrate those resources to appropriate cloud offerings. So that might be moving a virtual machine to another virtual machine, but it might also be if you have an on-premise SQL server, sort of rather than moving the virtual machine that SQL server is on, it would be a case of moving it to an Azure SQL database, or the AWS or GCP equivalent of what kind of just hosted SQL server or hosted MySQL or MariaDB. These kind of processes, sort of it takes advantage of more of the different. It takes advantage of more resources within the cloud provider and kind of moves into the platform as a service. So I'll cover that a little bit more detail shortly. The other type of sort of scenario where you might want to be spinning up virtual machines and storage accounts and sort of basic networking and not really putting any kind of bells and whistles in place is if you have a dev or a test environment. So this is where you don't want to invest in on-premise hardware for servers that are only going to be around for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then those machines are going to sit there fallow until the next test run. Having the ability to have these machines be spun up and shut down, and you only pay for while they're running, which is one of the major benefits of running in the cloud versus on-prem, means that you can run these workloads, pay for what you use, and shut them down. So you end up saving saving money, and reducing your kind of capital expenditure and your ongoing costs. So it just gives you that ability to be a bit more flexible. So to summarize within infrastructure as a code. So moving on to the next slide.
I have a question, Matt.
Yep.
I see all of these nice logos or these images below. I see like a virtual machine and then one image I don't know, and then a storage account. Are these all considered infrastructure as a service resources?
Yeah, so primarily they are infrastructure as a service resources. So as you said, you've got the virtual machine, which is the one on the left. One on the right is your storage account, which is just primary storage. So if you've got files, there's a way of storing it in effectively a file server hierarchy. The one in the middle is a load balancer, so it's a little bit grey in that a load balancer itself might be considered platform as a service, but it's there more to represent the underlying kind of core networking capabilities within the cloud.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I think we'll cover platform as a service in a bit, so I can't wait for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Just before you jump onto the next slide, Matt, in terms of storage accounts, what sort of stuff can I store in there? Because there's a couple of different tiers and ways you can connect to them as well, isn't there?
There is. I mean, most of that I think will be covered in the next section when we go into storage accounts in more detail, as in not tonight, but the next lesson. Sort of that's where the different types of services come in. But a storage account itself, Lisa kind of alluded to briefly, can store tables. It can have a queue configuration. It also has, like I mentioned, a kind of file hierarchy. So you can basically create a file share like you would do on a Windows 2016 server. It also has the base sort of, or the cloud kind of storage atomic unit of a blob, so a binary object. So this is where you literally just sort of throw files into a container or various containers, and sort of it's just stored as an object that can then be manipulated as sort of through other services as you see fit.
Cool, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, to summarize, kind of infrastructure as a service, it offers the flexibility and the scalability that all services within the cloud offer. It has the most control out of the types of resources that you can get. You pay for what you use. You don't pay for it just sat there taking space up in your own server room from an on-prem point of view. It ties in with the security and compliance features that come with the cloud platform. So this is the Azure Defender for Cloud that Simon spoke about, and it also kind of integrates quite easily with other services. So that is the kind of a summary of what infrastructure as code is. So if we move on to platform next. Okay, so platform as a service. This is where Lisa, I think your experience comes in a little bit more. Kind of you're not too, like you mentioned previously, you're not too afraid with networking or VMs. But two of the logos on these slides are Cosmos DB and Azure SQL.
I mean, I love it. So yeah, definitely all here for it.
Yeah. So platform as a service is where the cloud service provider takes on more responsibility over managing the services that they offer. So on top of what infrastructure as a service kind of the responsibilities there, so they still look after the hardware. They still make sure that Gregor can't get into the data center and poke the machines that are running your services. The provider also looks after the operating system and the patching of those systems. So in the case of Azure SQL, you spin up an Azure SQL instance, and you don't see the VM or the SQL server as it's such running underneath. You don't patch the SQL server. You have no real interaction at that level. Kind of you have some configuration options through the SQL Server Management Studio, but your primary focus is configuring that SQL Server and the databases it runs on. Kind of the patching and making sure it's running is down to Microsoft. The great kind of benefit for platform as a service offerings is that it gives developers a sort of a way to be able to kind of create and generate applications quickly, focusing just on their code, supplying new functionality and updated features, whilst leaving the underlying kind of operation and maintenance of those platforms to the service provider. So The icon on the left is an Azure web app. So this is effectively, for want of a better description, an IaaS service. So a web server that's just sat in Azure that is running. So it might be running on a VM. You just don't know, sort of what the configuration is underneath this service that you configure. But a developer can create a website, deploy it to an Azure web app, and then it just runs. And then all of a sudden they have a website running. They don't need to worry about the virtual machine. They don't need to worry about the operating system that virtual machine's running on. They don't even have to worry about whether they're running IaaS or Apache or Nginx or whatever sort of web server that they're wanting to run. They just have to worry about their code and getting it working. So this gives developers the ability to get things up and running very easily. So this is where kind of the move and improve comes in. So rather than keeping things the same as you had on an on-premise data center, this is where you could take advantage of these new systems and platforms or services to reduce your maintenance overhead and let your developers and your highly technical people kind of focus on the things that they should be focusing on. Okay, moving on. So as with IaaS, kind of the services are generally scalable and they have a pay-per-use option. This is where if you spin up a SQL server, you will pay for it while it's running, and you'll designate a certain amount of compute and cost to that, and Microsoft will charge you for it. There is also the introduction of consumption plans that Lisa sort of alluded to previously. This is when you start getting into some of the other platform as a service components that aren't on these slides, but Azure Functions and Logic Apps, where you can sit it in a consumption model. So a consumption model is you only pay for it whilst it's running. So it sounds similar to pay as you go, but the difference is that if you have an API that's doing responds to calls, but it only happens once or twice a week, but you don't know when that's going to happen, you can have it sat there on a consumption plan waiting. So the server is live, or the API is live, waiting for a response, but it is just sat there waiting, and then when the call comes in and the Azure function kicks off and starts running, you get charged for the minutes that the function is running for, and then once it's finished, you stop paying for it. So it's a very cost-effective way of running these kind of ad hoc, smaller kind of tasks where you don't want to have a dedicated website running 24/7 for these loads. So there's a couple of extra things that you can do with the platform as a service around these kind of consumption models. So overall, kind of platform as a service is still highly flexible and an efficient way of building an application. It gives you greater control over how you pay for it in the different plans that are available. But you do lose a little bit of control in that Microsoft are controlling the operating system layer. So kind of, you don't control when they patch it. You don't control when they move it to new infrastructure. So we've had potential outages where Microsoft themselves have rolled out a new version of a package or an application within an Azure function, and that has broken somebody's already deployed code because there was a bug in the application, and then Microsoft had to roll it back, and so you do lose some control in that. If this was a virtual machine where you were controlling what you installed, then kind of you would have the ability to test things without Microsoft just changing things under the hood without telling you. So I've briefly mentioned Azure sort of apps, web apps, and Azure Functions. These are two of the platform as a service. There's also Cosmos DB that is the NoSQL database service that Microsoft offer. There is AKS, which is a bit of a funny one in that it's classed as platform as a service in that it's Kubernetes as a service, but you still have access to the underlying infrastructure components as well. So it's a bit of a funny one in that some people will class it as platform. I kind of class it as a halfway in between, in that the service itself is platform, but you still have some control over the underlying networking and virtual machine scale sets. So moving on to when you would look to use platform as a service over infrastructure. So there are certain use cases where they're both very capable of doing similar jobs, but when you have a focus on development and you're wanting your developers to focus on developing rather than deploying infrastructure or maintaining infrastructure, this is where platform as a service comes in. That platform as a service provides this framework so developers can create new applications and new features using these inbuilt components, while still offering the benefits of the cloud as a whole. The other sort of main scenario that platform as a service excels at is kind of data analytics. So this is where you supply data to various services that I'm sure Lisa could probably name off the top of her head, but this is my weaker area. I focus on the infrastructure side of things, but it's to analyze data and kind of to find patterns within that data and kind of to help improve your forecasting, but also to help produce reports for finance or for marketing or whoever, kind of that would be using this data to kind of generate more business intelligence more than anything. So this is kind of where Power BI and the data platform elements come in.
Yeah, I think Databricks might be considered platform as a service.
Yeah,
and Azure Data Factory as well. I'm not 100% certain, but I think that is true.
I would say both of those are a platform. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I have a question for you, Matt.
Yeah.
What would you say are your top 3 PaaS services and why?
My top 3 PaaS services. So, sort of from my focus, where it's all infrastructure and automation, my general day-to-day life is focusing on Azure Functions. So that is very much at the top of my list. I would say from an old school on-prem sysadmin, having something that will look after SQL Server for me is very nice. So Azure SQL is probably quite high up there in that it just means that I don't have to worry about having to look after the SQL Server. But the top one will probably have to be the bog standard generic web app. It's very flexible in what it can do, but it like the SQL Server, I come from a life of having to look after web servers and having to kind of manage those. So somebody taking that away from me means that I don't have to worry about that anymore. So that would be my top 3.
I would say I have a confession to make here. I have never used a web app before, so.
Well, that needs to change.
I'm sorry, what did you say there?
That's got to change.
You've never deployed a web app? Wow.
No.
Oh.
Well, when we get to doing the demos, you can deploy a live web app for us.
Yeah, we need to do that. We'll do that in the demos.
Live on Lighthole.
Part 2.
I can finally start learning about web apps. Cool. Shall I go to the next slide?
Yep. So it's just a summary slide, but just to summarize, the platform as a service, it's highly flexible and efficient way to build and deploy applications in the cloud. It's a way for your developers to focus on what they want to be doing rather than getting bogged down in infrastructure management. And we've kind of covered off the types of services that are classed as platform. So if we move on to software as a service, so this is possibly the the model that you're most likely to come across outside of IT, in that this is the model where the service provider looks after pretty much everything for you. So over and above getting it accessible to the internet and looking after the operating system, it is the full application. So the only thing that you are really managing yourself is the data that you put into it, and sort of who has access. So it is fully accessible over the internet, generally, from within a web browser. Sometimes an app on your phone, but the principle remains. These are, rather than renting hardware or a development platform, you effectively rent the application. It's more likely it's a subscription model, but I'll cover that in the next slide. So the full application is something that is on offer from Microsoft or from Google or whatever cloud service provider you're using. So any kind of service that you use over the internet is probably a software as a service offering. This could be anything from Zoom or Lighthall, even Gmail, Office 365 or Microsoft 365. They are all this kind of offering. Like with PaaS, sort of with the removal of responsibility of some of the layers, you also lose control. So not only are you no longer in control of the operating system, you're no longer in control of the application, because you're paying for Microsoft to provide you SharePoint or Google to provide you Gmail. If they decide to change something, then it's going to change. So you have no control over that. The only control you have is who you give access to your system. The benefit of these SaaS services, however, is that it vastly reduces the technical know-how needed to get a system up and running. In that, if all you wanted was an email address and to be able to send and receive email, would you rather sit with a server in your spare room, trying to install an email server, configuring all the DNS records to ensure that you can communicate out to the internet, backing up anything that you need to ensure so you don't lose any of your emails? Or do you just go to Google or Microsoft and sign up for something at Gmail or Outlook? So that is where the benefits outweigh the sort of the lost time. Sort of the logos on these slides from left to right are Microsoft 365. So this is the suite of SaaS products that Microsoft offer. So everything from Outlook through to SharePoint and OneDrive. In the middle is a SaaS solution that is offered on Azure. This is SendGrid. This is used to send email out, but in bulk. So rather than using an Outlook kind of mailbox, this is where you've got 100,000 emails that you want to send out to your mailing list. So you use one of these services that you validate against, so it ensures that you're not blacklisting half of Microsoft's IP addresses. And the service on the right is HubSpot, which is just like a connectivity tool for tying other SaaS services together. And so I briefly mentioned it, but SaaS applications generally, because they're business applications, run on a subscription model. So this is where you pay usually per user per month. So rather than having any kind of capital expenditure and maintenance costs, you just pay Microsoft, £8 per user per month to run your email server for you. It's a good way to move away from the traditional capital expenditure and just move into an operational cost. So if you have a sudden burst of growth, you're not having to waste cost on servers that you're not going to use. You just increase the number of licenses that you buy from Microsoft, and they give you more mailboxes for your new users. It's a very efficient and cost-effective way of being able to manage that kind of flexibility without the hassle of maintaining things yourself. Like I said, there's a variety of different examples that you could use. The most popular kind of business, I think, platform or SaaS platform that might be out there is Salesforce, in that it's a customer relationship management platform, but you have other SaaS applications that sit on top of Salesforce as a platform. But that is, a system where your sales teams will interact with customers and keep a track of what leads of what sales are potentially going to happen. Dropbox, OneDrive, that as a cloud-based file storage, also a SaaS offering, in that sort of you're paying Dropbox or Microsoft to look after your files for you. Or if you want to go down a full kind of cloud productivity suite, you can now get Word, Excel, PowerPoint all in a web browser. You're not even having to download them onto your machine as a fat client. It can all be done in the browser, so if you so wish, similar to G Suite. So yeah, that's generally the scenarios that you'd be coming across, is that you've got these highly efficient SaaS offerings that just increase your productivity, because you're not having to focus on having to deploy a heavy underutilized hardware behind the scenes, and you can focus on what you need. So to just do a quick summary of the three kind of use cases. So there is some kind of crossover between infrastructure, platform, and software as a service, but we jump a slide or two ahead. Yeah, that's one. So infrastructure as a service, kind of is focused on virtual machines and hosting things in a almost traditional way that you would do on premise or on premises, where you had a data center yourself. It's also very good for spinning up test and development environments, and also quite useful for backup and disaster recovery. So it could be that you're copying things out to the cloud. It's not your primary data center or your primary sort of region. It is just a backup location. So if something happened to your headquarters office, you have a way of ensuring that your branch offices still have a way of working. Platform as a service, the focus is a little bit more on application development and analytics, and software as a service is collaboration and productivity. So whether that's expense tracking applications for your finance team, or sales tracking and lead tracking for your sales. So I briefly kind of mentioned that there were different levels of responsibility when it comes to infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. This is where we come on to the shared responsibility model. So in comparison to on-premises, each of the different models, the customer and Microsoft or the cloud service provider has a different level of responsibility. So it's a way of kind of outlining kind of the boundaries of what you're responsible for as the user deploying these things versus what Microsoft is responsible for. And as you cede more responsibility to Microsoft, your levels of control go down, but also the level of maintenance and kind of risk also kind of can be mitigated. So there are distinct roles for the different services. On the right hand side of this, you can see that for on premises applications, you're responsible for everything. Kind of if somebody wants to get into your data center, you're responsible for the actual physical security. You're responsible for making sure that data center can get to the internet. You're responsible for the operating system and the applications, the configuration, everything. Whereas for infrastructure code, Microsoft take away that responsibility for the physical aspects of the services. So they provide you the building, they provide you the security for that building, they provide you the internet connection, and they provide you the hardware. But you choose what operating system, you choose what kind of network controls, you choose the applications, and everything else above. So that is one step for, away from you controlling everything. When it comes to platform as a service, you also see the operating system to Microsoft. It means that you have no control over when they do the updates, but they patch things and make sure that you're not vulnerable to any risks that come out. There is also a blurring of lines between network control, the applications, and kind of the directory infrastructure for platform as a service. This is because you can still modify the access for some of your systems over and open things out to the internet if you want. If you open out a web app or an Azure function to the internet, malicious things could potentially happen, but Microsoft have some control over that to make sure that you don't DDoS the rest of the platform. You're still responsible for platform as a service for the user accounts and all the data that you're putting into the system, similar to software as a service. Whereas the software as a service, you are also ceding all of that kind of network control away. You are just focusing on the application and nothing else. So this responsibility model is quite important on the exam, in that there's quite a lot of focus about the differentiation between the different levels. And there may be the occasional question around what is suitable for certain aspects within requirements. So if you want to have control over the operating system, they'll ask that kind of thing of which model do you need to be going for that. I think that is pretty much everything to do with the shared responsibility model. Are there any other questions that I missed whilst not looking at the chat?
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, except for the ones that were already answered in the chat themselves, because there were more for the exam generically speaking. Yep. Yes.
Okay, right, let's bring up the Azure portal. Okay, so the Azure portal, let's do some demos real quick. So first of all, you have to go to portal.azure.com. That's where the Azure portal lives. Let me just hide so you can't see that. Okay. So that'll log me in. So first of all, you kind of come to this initial screen. So the interesting thing is I'm logged in as my Hotmail address. So this is my own subscription that I've got. It's a Visual Studio subscription. So you can sign up for a Visual Studio subscription where you'll get, I think it's €150 a month free, or £150, depending on where you live. So first of all, you can sign up for that and get access to Azure for free and play about with it for a certain amount of money each month. So once you've got a subscription, if I click on subscriptions, I have currently got 3 subscriptions. These are probably an old one. This is the one I tend to use, like what I just said. You can sign up for a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. I've got £115, I think it is, maybe, each month. So it's telling me I've got £83.08 left. So if I click on this subscription, I can see things like, if I go to resource groups. So what you tend to do in Azure is you put all of your resources into resource groups to try and kind of group them. A bit like Windows Explorer, where you create folders and you put relevant files into a folder. You can put relevant Azure services into a resource group. So if I was going to create a storage account, let's create a resource group. We'll create a quick virtual machine and a quick storage account, and we'll just show you how this kind of stuff works. So I'll just create a quick resource group. So let's just do that right now. I'm going to choose my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. For some reason, it's not even... Okay. It's not even popping up correctly. Hang on. Try that again. Don't know why it's doing that. Let's do Azure AZ-900 demos. this is asking me where do I want to put this region. This resource group. So I'll put it in West Europe because that's where I normally put stuff. And then I'm just going to click review and create, and then create. So that's just going to create a very fast and easy folder, basically. So a resource group is where you kind of put resources. So let's go ahead and deploy a virtual machine, for example, and a storage account. So we'll start off by just creating a storage account. So I can go up to here and click create. And this brings up what's called the Azure Marketplace. So the Azure Marketplace is where I can go and choose which Azure resources I want to create and use. But you can also get resources from other companies. So other companies like Red Hat and there's all sorts of other companies, Infront and Wipro. They can create Azure resources and sell these resources in the Azure Marketplace. So I'm just going to type storage account. And then I'm going to click on storage account. Click create. And then I'm going to choose the subscription. I'm going to put that in my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. I'm going to put it in the resource group that I created. And then I have to give it a storage account name. So I'm just going to call it like that. So it doesn't really matter what I call it. There are some guide rules on this, but for the time being, I'm just going to call it that. Then it's going to ask me where do I want to deploy this storage account. So I'm going to go for West Europe again. I can deploy that whenever I want. And then it kind of starts to ask me like what kind of storage account performance do I want? What kind of redundancy do I want? So for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to go for locally redundant. We'll cover all of this in the upcoming sessions, but this is just me giving you a flavor of what the portal looks like and how we can deploy some Azure resources. So I'm just going to click advanced. I'm just basically going to click through this. There's all sorts of networking options, data protection options, encryption options. There's all sorts of settings here, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to click review, and then I'm going to click create, which is going to create a storage account in West Europe for me. So that's how you create an Azure resource. Let's do one more real quick because we've got a couple minutes left. So I'm going to go back to the resource group, and then I'm going to create a virtual machine this time so we can have a look at some of these options. Again, I'm going to create a virtual machine. I've went into the marketplace. I've searched for what I want to install. Clicking on virtual machine. I'm going to click create. And now it's going to prompt me for some settings. So it's going to ask me, where do I want to put this? So that's basically telling me that it's created the storage account. So again, I'm putting it into the Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. Again, I'm going to put it in my resource group called RG-AZ-900 Demos. Now I've put RG at the start so that it's got some sort of naming convention. So RG stands for resource group. I'm just going to call this VM1 because I'm not very good at naming things. I'm going to put it in the region West Europe. It's going to try and say, okay, you live near the UK South, but I'm just going to choose that. I'm going to skip most of this. I'm going to choose a Windows 11 Pro, and it's going to ask me for a username. I'm just going to type in some details real quick. And this is a version, this is like PaaS. This is an IaaS service, a virtual machine. So I'm just going to create this virtual machine. I'm actually going to do this, which is a little bit naughty. So you shouldn't really do this when you're setting up a virtual machine, but just for the purposes of this, I'm just going to click I confirm, and then I'm just going to go for this. We've got like a minute left, so I'm just going to deploy this virtual machine. And its validation's failed because that's just typical. I've obviously missed a setting somewhere. So I'm hoping it's going to tell me what setting it was. No, it's not going to tell me. Usually it tells you what's wrong. Don't know, I'm going to try and review and create that again. Yeah, for some reason it just decided to do it right. And I'm just going to click create. So that's a very simple virtual machine created from the Azure portal. That'll take a couple of minutes and it'll go into my resource group along with my storage account. Yeah, not the most exciting demos in the world, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is to create resources in Azure. In the next sessions coming up, 2 and 3, we'll be doing a lot more demos. So this first session was quite slide heavy. Sections 2 and sections 3 will be a lot more in-depth into services within the portal and what they do and what you can use them for, and we'll do a lot more demos. So hopefully we can all join next Tuesday at roughly the same time, but we'll send an email out. So if I jump back quickly to the slides, I don't know if I've still got the slides here. Yeah, I've got the slides here. I'll just put them up. So please fill in the feedback URL, and the next session will be on the 11th. That's it. So just wanted to say thank you to Lisa, Simon, and Matt. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. This is the first time we've done this, so it's been a little bit rough, but we've all enjoyed it. Hope you have too.
Thank you to everybody for joining. I think that was a huge pleasure. Thank you.
Daniel's just stuck a really quick question in there. How much coding knowledge is needed to start a career in cloud? What would you say? Let's ask everybody. Lisa, what's your thoughts on that question?
I think it would depend from specialty to specialty, and also because there are so many different specialties in the cloud. So when I talk about data, then if you want to do more like data infrastructure kind of things, like building platforms, then you don't even necessarily have to code. You just have to know a little about the data platforms. And if you want to build more data applications, you actually also don't necessarily have to know how to code. There are some applications out there that don't even have you coding. That's just more like a graphical user interface. But if you could code, then that would definitely help, I would say, to understand things a bit better. Yeah.
Simon, what's your thoughts on that question?
It's kind of like what Lisa said. It depends on which track you want to go down. So my background's been IT ops. So taking PowerShell out of the equation, to get started with just deploying resources in Azure, as long as you understand the fundamentals of how networking and how a data center works, I don't really think you need to know anything to get started. It definitely helps, and it can improve your cloud career and getting resources deployed and debugging. But if you're totally new to Azure and you've never done it, you'll be fine, and you can learn the PowerShell along the way. But for the most part, you can start with a portal adventure like what Greg has just shown, and you can deploy those resources all through clicking through the UI without needing to know any sort of PowerShell or AZ-CLI commands. So, but it definitely helps. So I'd definitely add it to your learning track alongside the AZ-900 exam, is to go look at PowerShell and AZ-CLI.
Matt, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say if you're just starting out, then it's not necessary as such, but it's certainly something that would improve your chances of progressing. So when it comes to infrastructure, within the cloud, there's a heavy focus on infrastructure as code, as Simon mentioned previously. So that for Azure, that could be Bicep, that could just be PowerShell or Azure CLI. Or it could be something like Terraform, which is a little bit more platform agnostic. So if you're doing stuff with AWS, you could use it there. But those things come in time. If you're coming from a on-premises sort of infrastructure point of view, and you've dabbled with PowerShell or you've dabbled with a bit of Bash scripting, then that will probably stand you in good stead to pick up what you need to progress. I certainly wouldn't say it's an absolute need. It is certainly a benefit, and it's certainly something I would put some effort into doing, but you don't need to dive into coding as in development coding. So the stuff that kind of Gregor has done previously, that if you know some scripting, that will stand you in good stead, and that's probably enough.
Yeah, so I would agree. You don't need it to start off with. You might learn it as you go. So don't be worried that you need to be a coder or you need to know C# or anything like that. That's not the case. You might want to learn general scripting as you go. I don't think any of us kind of started doing cloud and then started with scripting or coding at the start. So yeah, you can definitely pick up as you go, Emmanuel. Yeah. All right, I think we're a wee bit over time, but I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for attending. We'll be back next week, almost at the same time. Send an email out with the details. Thank you for joining. Hope you enjoyed this. And next time we are session 2, and we'll have a bit more demos, and hopefully kind of the same people will be doing the content again. So hopefully Lisa, Simon, and Matt, you're all available next Tuesday.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
You.
Take it easy. Bye for now.
Cool. Thanks all. See you later.
Bye.